Sri Lanka has not been able to produce a single national cricketer who has been performing consistently at international level after early 2000. All what selectors can do is to select the best available players, come through the system and perform at Division 1 level. But if the system does not produce players, the quality players, there's very little selectors can do. That is why I say that we can't make them responsible unless and until the system, domestic standard is raised. We had a fairly good system before 2000, and changes made to system since 2000 created the downfall of Sri Lanka cricket. Not only created the downfall of Sri Lanka cricket, but also it changed the culture, cricket culture we had before 2000. And unfortunately, those decisions, those changes were made, or changes that were made were not intended to develop cricket, but only those administrators to remain in power as long as possible.
Good day to all. Today we are here to discuss one of the important and key topic which is widely discussed is none other than Sri Lankan cricket, and especially the failure of Sri Lankan cricket recent past, and also what sort of things is needed to develop Sri Lankan cricket from here to getting back that momentum which we had in the Sri Lankan cricket. So in this context, we thought to get our guest today, a very special personality who knows about Sri Lankan cricket. It's none other than Mr. Sudharma de Silva. When it comes to Mr. Sudharma de Silva, I'd like to give a small brief introduction for you. He is the former national cricketer, coach, qualified umpire, and also match referee and General Secretary of the Bloomfield Cricket and Athletic Club. And now I'd like to ask Mr. Sudharma de Silva, when it comes to the recent past, the Sri Lankan cricket has failed at their lowest level. So what made this happen and what is the reason for this?
We all agree that Sri Lanka national team performance has been very inconsistent, at least for the last 5 to 6 years. In my view is that it is not the exact problem I believe that Sri Lanka cricket is facing. The problem that Sri Lanka cricket is facing, the overall standard of Sri Lanka cricket has come down. Only as a result of that, national team is performance is inconsistent. And there is another thing, that Sri Lanka has not been able to produce a single national cricketer who has been performing consistently at international level after early 2000. A player who has started representing Sri Lanka after early 2000 has not performed consistently at international. Last few players who performed well at international level, I believe that is Mahela Sangha, Dilchan and Matthews Malik. Thereafter, all of them struggle at international level. And this clearly shows that I would say that downward trend of Sri Lanka cricket started way back in early 2000. And we are only facing the consequences of wrong administration decisions taken since 2000.
Let's agree and assume that the problems decline overall standard of cricket in Sri Lanka. What do you think the specific reason for this decline?
Yeah, as I said, the wrong decisions made in early 2000 is they changed the structure. They decided to change the structure, domestic structure, and which created the downfall of Sri Lanka cricket. Not only that, it's created a gap between the international standard and the domestic standard. Huge gap created. And in a situation like this, I believe that we cannot make selectors, coaches and players responsible. And keep changing selectors, coaches and players will not solve the problem.
You mean players, coaches and selectors are not responsible for losing matches?
No, don't get me wrong. They are responsible. I don't deny the fact that the winning or losing will depend on the combined efforts made by players, coaches and selectors. But we are talking about the performance of over a period of time, not few matches or one or two series. So we need to understand, accept and admit there is something more than the mistakes made by selectors, coaches and players. All selectors, all coaches and all players have become failures all this time. And also, all what selectors can do is to select the best available players, come through the system and perform at Division 1 level. But if the system does not produce players, quality players, there's very little selectors can do. That is why I say that we can't make them responsible unless and until the system domestic standard is raised.
Although you say the weakness of the domestic cricket structure is the reason for this downfall, isn't it the same system we had for a longer period and Sri Lanka has won 2 World Cups to the nation?
We had a fairly good system before 2000, and changes made to the system since 2000 created the downfall of Sri Lanka cricket. Not only created the downfall of Sri Lanka cricket, but also it changed the culture, cricket culture we had before 2000. And unfortunately, those decisions, those changes were made, or changes that were made were not intended to develop cricket, but only those administrators to remain in power as long as possible. As a result of that, not only created a downfall of Sri Lanka cricket, but we were not able to produce world-class players like the caliber of Arjuna, Sanat, Aravind, Roshan, Hashan, Mahela Sangha, and all of them, all players represented Sri Lanka after early 2000 struggled in the international level.
What is the cricketing culture you are talking about which we had before 2000?
Mary, that I will explain to you what the system we had before 2000, then you will understand the culture that we are talking about. The main contributor to Sri Lanka cricket in terms of developing and producing players were clubs. It is a fact. And if you can remember, before 2000, there were a number of clubs who mainly contributed in producing national players. SSC, NCC, Bloomfield, CCC, Coles, BRC, Tamil Union Moors, and there are a few other outstation clubs like Panadura, Gaul, Kurunegala. All these clubs had something in common. All of them had infrastructure facilities, at least grounds. And the more facilities those clubs had for players, the higher the number of national cricketers those clubs produced. When I say this, what immediately comes into my mind is in 1985, that was the year that we had our first ever test win against India. And during that series, one of the test matches, composition of our team was NCC and SSC versus India. And I wouldn't say that is it's a good thing to have all players from 2 clubs, but that shows that how much of contribution those clubs have made for Sri Lanka cricket. And cricketers after leaving school used to join clubs of their own choice and played Division 3, Division 2, Division 1. Okay? There was a clear path for all players. And all those national cricketers and even international cricketers used to go through that path. A good example is in 1982, Arjuna Ranatunga represented SSC in a Division 2 game where he scored a double 100. This match was watched by Sir Garfield Somers, who was the national coach at that time. Now, after watching that match, he was picked for the first ever test match that he played. So that shows that even not only Arjuna played the lower division of cricket, and from there onwards they made it to international level. So what clubs did when players joined those clubs? What clubs did was they looked after the players and they provided facilities for those players to to improve their game, develop their game. And they looked after those players and they groomed those players. Not only that, the system made clubs responsible to produce players, develop players. And also they wanted to produce players. Those clubs had a feeling of ownership of those players. They took the pride of those players' achievements. On the other hand, the players had the club loyalty and they had a sense of belonging. And they knew they were being looked after by someone. There is someone to guide them. And with that, the relationship, with club-player relationship, there is a strong bond between the players and clubs. As a result of this, and almost all players played before 2000, played only for one club or maximum of two clubs during their whole career. And there was another situation. The viewer interest, the spectator interest is very high. And because of the relationship that clubs and the players had, there was a lot of spectators. The set of spectators were there for each and every club. For a big club match like SSC Bluefield, SSC CCC or NCC Bluefield, we could see about 500 to 1,000 people watching those matches. Right? But this was basically our cricket culture we had. It goes back to about 50 to 100 years. All these things were changed after making changes to that structure. What happened? The clubs are not interested in producing players. Clubs are forced to buy players, and clubs could not produce any players. The players were moving around from one club to another every year, and the players were forced to change clubs and leave clubs. And the spectator interest was not there because even the spectators or the supporters were not sure the players who are going to play for the club they support. That obviously contributed to the downfall of Sri Lanka cricket.
In your opinion, what are the specific changes that were introduced after the year 2000 which have the negative impacts for the overall standard of cricket in Sri Lanka?
For easy understanding, we will compare the two systems. The system that we had before 2000 and the changes, specific changes made after 2000 and their negatives. The first change they made was the number of teams in the Division 1. What we had before 2000 is between 8 to 14 teams. Now, or even after 2000, it was increased to as many as 26 teams. What happens when the more teams play in the highest level, skill level gets diluted and the quality gets diluted, the standard comes down. That happened. And the second and third change they made, when we have 26 teams, there are new teams playing in the Division 1. So, majority of those clubs didn't have infrastructure. They could not produce players. They could not develop players. And this, in order to distribute the players among the other clubs, they used this as a strategy with other two changes. The second change they made was they limit the 20 players to Division 1 club, per club. So with that, obviously it was distributed, no damage was, major damage was done. If the damage had been done, it has already been done by increasing the number. The third change they made was they cancelled the Division 2 tournament for all Division 1 clubs. In my opinion, this is probably the worst decision they made, and that clearly affected the entire downfall of Sri Lanka.
What are the negative effects?
When you have limited number of teams, what happens when you make 20 players for one per team? Immediately, all players leave clubs, change clubs, because there is no Division 2 team. Clubs cannot retain players. Let's assume 15 of them, out of 20, get the majority of the majority of opportunities to play matches, and the balance 5 players will be on the bench for the entire season because they have no cricket to play. There is no development take place and they don't have cricket to play. And also that in the event a player gets dropped after playing 2 or 3 matches, there is no way of that player making a comeback by proving himself playing a lower division. The other weakness is that when you don't have a lower division team, there is no competition. When you don't have the competition, the standard comes down. It's only one team for all clubs. Right? And the long-term weaknesses, long-term problems, negative effects would be is that the clubs do not produce players, develop players. As I told you that the clubs who had infrastructure facilities produce players, develop players, produce players. Now the new clubs, those who don't have infrastructure facilities, instead of bringing them to the level of the clubs, those who have infrastructure facilities, what the system did, what the changes did was bringing all clubs to the same level. None of the clubs couldn't produce players. All clubs at the same level, by cancelling the Division 2, all 26 clubs were not responsible for developing players and they could not produce players. Because there is no cricket to play. So that directly affected the standard of cricket in this country. So this has been happening for over a period of time now, more than 10 years. And the clubs do not produce players, and there is no continuous or regular development of players, and that is on the other hand, players from moving from one club to the other, and they were forced to leave clubs, and also these players, in this generation of cricketers, were made like cricketing orphans because there's no one to look after them. There's no one to guide them. So that it was there because the standard came down. The standard came down with that. After these things happened for a long time, what happened is that there was a market created for players. Since that they don't belong to any club now, there is a separate market created for players. After 10 years, after a long time, what happens? That where the market gets players from? Directly from school. So that shows the standard has come down. That alone shows the standard has come down because most of the school players play Division 1 now, unlike in the past. So that they can easily play. That shows that standard has clearly come down in Sri Lanka.
Mr. Sudharma, tell us also, in your view, the changes made to the domestic cricket structure in the reason for the decline of overall standard of cricket in Sri Lanka. And who do you think is responsible for this situation? Is that the present administration, you think?
It's not only present administration, all administrations we had since 2000. And also, not only the people who are responsible for making those decisions, making those changes, and others for not identifying the potential danger. The issue with SLC is that once a committee is elected, their priority is not to develop cricket, but to do everything possible to be in power as much as possible. And also SLC committee or the people responsible must come out and tell what has happened to Sri Lanka cricket now. They don't even come out and tell public. Public has a right to know. And these elected committees responsible to tell people what has happened, what action they will take on this issue.
In your opinion, decline of the overall standard of Sri Lankan cricket as a country, are there any other effects than the points you were discussing with us today?
Barry, you know that when the standard of cricket comes down, Sri Lanka economy is affected also. Let me explain. How we differentiate cricket from other sports is That is the only game, only professional game we have in Sri Lanka. Only game that we have which has reached international level. Only game that contributes to the economy of this country because it earns foreign exchange. And how cricket earns foreign exchange? Yes, we know that SLC is getting paid annually by ICC, and all international matches we get paid, and also by selling TV rights we are getting foreign exchange. Not only that, there are first-class cricketers who go overseas and play cricket during off-season. They also earn foreign exchange. In addition, that the franchise cricket, like players who play franchise cricket like IPL, BPL, PPL and League Bash, and also T10 tournaments, they also earn foreign exchange. And also that our coaches, umpires, match referees, curators, they also earn foreign exchange. If you look at it from a commercial point of view, Sri Lanka cricket as a product or a resource, Sri Lanka being one of the best 12 cricket playing countries in the world, we have a recognition or a demand for our product. Our cricket has a demand in the international market, right? And when the standard goes up, the demand goes up. Similarly, when the standard comes down, the demand goes down. Since our standard has come down now, very clearly shows that demand has come down. That we don't have a demand. So our players don't have a demand in IPL cricket is one of the indicators. So that our standard has come down, there is no demand. And also, economy is affected.
What do you think the solution? Now we need the solution. What do you think this SLC should be doing right now?
Once the problem is clear, the reasons for the problem is identified and the root cause is identified, now SLC committee has to face the reality and accept the mistakes, admit and accept the mistakes made in the past, irrespective of who made those decisions, and introduce a new system, domestic system, encourage clubs to produce players. All 26 clubs to produce players. If we do that, there is no doubt whatsoever, we can at least come to the level that we were in about 3 to 4 years' time. And if we don't do that also, that if we go further down and there is a potential danger to be out of international cricket soon.
Thank you very much, Sudharma De Silva. Joining with us, you would have got the insight of the Sri Lankan cricket today, having discussing the last half an hour or so about the Sri Lankan standard and how it has affected Sri Lankan cricket and what we should do from here to develop the cricket. So this is what the very insightful evening we had with General Secretary of the Bloomfield Cricket Club, Sudharma De Silva. We thank you very much for joining us today and sharing this wonderful experience and in the interest of Sri Lankan cricket. Thank you very much.